But we have also, through our history as humans, always been struggling, because in the old days, we were always more or less struggling, trying to collect resources enough for our lives. And that was a challenge. We also had limited of knowledge, because it was hard to build knowledge and share knowledge. We had not the art of printing. And what is a good life has also changed. Today, if you talk with people, maybe not here in Thailand, a lot of people would say this is a good life. To be on a beach, and to have a cold drink, just relaxing. At least if you talk to people in Europe, or at least North Europe, a lot of people think this is paradise. But historically, paradise was very much linked to where we could find resources. A good life where we had secure safety, we had food enough, and so on. But that has changed. If you go back in time, and if I would have asked you, and you would have lived in, this is annoying. This is from Manchester, 1850. If I would have asked you, would you like to live in this place? You would have raised your hand quicker than I have been able to finish the sentence. How many of you would like to live in this place now? No hands up. How many of you would like to not live in this place? Hands up. Oh, there are some hands down. Okay. Anyway, the reason why this were considered to be a very positive place back then is because this really shows a place where you can have a good life, a safe life, food on the table. And what is creating that in image is actually all the chimneys and the smoke. Because it symbolizes production, productivity, a good life, money. It's even poem from this time stating and describing how the smoke is coming out from the chimneys and spreading wealth over the surroundings. Da Vinci in this picture added in extra chimneys and extra smoke just to show how good place this is. And now we know better. But we had the Industrial Revolution. We had change from living in a society with lack of resources. And that changed a lot of things in our society. And before that, we had a focus in society when developing things. And what was that? Since we were lacking resources, we were creating products that was easy to repair, share, and reuse. We also created products that were durable. And the reason was that because most of the products we actually created ourselves. So why then create something that is not easy to repair, share, and durable? And the resources we used were quite basic. We didn't have that advanced materials as we do have today. And that idea we kept when moving into the Industrial Revolution. And we can now see that we have more products than ever in our society. Here are some pictures from Peter. He made a series of photos back in 1994 where he asked families to bring out their belongings from the houses, and then he took pictures from people around the world. And the picture on the right here is from Thailand, actually. And this is from Burma, this is from Iceland, these are from US. And we have a lot of products. And we are buying a lot of things without thinking so much. But I think you are not. Do you have a lot of products? Let's check. I will ask you to make some rough calculations. I want you to, for a few seconds, 1 minute, try to calculate how many products do you have at home. And one pair of trousers is one product, and a book is one product, a knife is one product. So start calculating. You make a rough estimate. You can start in your kitchen, or you can start in your bookshelves, the CD, old CDs. One pen is one product. Yes, this is a tricky one, but I assume you have a couple of thousand of products at home. Go back home and start counting. Actually, people get astonished when they realize how many products they do have at home. But we are not reflecting on that so much. And that is quite interesting because we'll come to that. Then you can ask yourself, how many of those are you using more than once a week? And I would say it's a small fraction of all the products you use more than once a week. Normally, when you go to check what clothes you want to have for the day, you don't go to the bottom of the wardrobe. You take from the top, and then you use them, and then you wash them, and then you put them back on the top. And the same if you go to a cupboard, take out a plate. Normally, you take from the top of the pile. You don't go to the bottom. So you're basically using the same products over and over again. If you look on one month's perspective, there are no big differences. Most of the products are just stored, never touched. If you look on a yearly perspective, then there are some seasonal differences, but still most of the products are just stored. And I doubt it's different from Sweden and Thailand, or Europe and Thailand, I would say. Then you can ask yourself, why did you buy the products that you do not use? Why did you buy them? There are a lot of rationales, and I would say, maybe I should mention why I go into this. It's because we as researchers, we as designers, we have created the knowledge and the things that ended up in the products we are not using. That's why I want us to reflect a little bit. There are a lot of excuses. Sometimes people state, okay, I bought it because it was a good price. And I thought it could be good to have. In some cases, it's because everyone else have it. So I also want to have it because I don't want to be different from others. And in some cases, I thought I was going to need it more than I actually did. Or I bought it because I thought it would be fun to have, but then I lost my interest in the product or the thing. Or, this is also quite common, that, I felt a little bit sad, so I want to cheer myself up a little bit, so I bought this type of product. There are a long list of rationales. And then you can also ask yourself, and this is a little bit sad, how much money have you spent on your products? that you don't use. And that is normally quite substantial amount of money. And the thing is that even if you're not using them, they are over time getting destroyed because the material is getting old, fragile, etc. Or the technology is getting obsolete or not useful any longer. So even if you're not using them, they are losing value. And then we also have this little tricky question. How much do you have to pay monthly to store products that you don't use? In a lot of cases, that is quite substantial. We have big, relatively big houses or flats with a lot of products that we are not using. We're just storing for no reason. Have you thought about this before? So, what is then a good product? I'll come back to that. I would say a good product is a product that provides us with value over time, and that is good from a life cycle cost perspective. That is useful, attractive. But what happened when you start mass production? That happened in the Industrial Revolution. We start to mass produce products that is easy to repair, durable, easy to share, etc. Yeah, we get something called saturated markets. And that's starting to happen in Europe and the UK and US around 1910, 1905. And it caused a lot of concerns among factory owners and policymakers. Because what will happen with the social order? Because at least in Europe, and I can see that still happening in the world, we had a big movement from the countryside to the cities, fast-growing cities with quite often poor living conditions, even if it was better than on the countryside. But the living conditions were based on the fact that you had to work in a factory. And quite often you also destroyed a lot of the social structure. On the countryside you lived quite close to your family. In the cities you were living with strangers. And in the city, if you had no money, no food. On the countryside you still could have some food that you grow yourself. So it started to be a lot of concerns, and you also had the knowledge about what happened in Soviet Union, Russia revolution. They didn't want to have it. So what to do? At the same time, we were living in a society and researchers were finding constantly new resources. And you must remember and imagine the world where we had not seen our small planet from the space. So people thought, oh, finally, the first time in humans' history, we are really have no problem with resources. We have constantly new resources emerging because researchers found new means of accessing, etc. So what is then a rational way to solve this problem when it comes to people being afraid that they need to close down factories? One of the solutions were actually popped up by Bernard London, and his idea was actually to have planned obsolescence. That products should not be allowed to be too durable, to live too long on the market. They should be abandoned, just in order to keep production up, to factories ongoing. It should be something that were promoted. And there are even other thinkers that are more commonly known that also stress this, and this is Maynard Keynes. He stated, I should support at the same time all sorts of policies for increasing the propensity to consume, for it's unlikely that full employment can be maintained whatever we may do about investment with the existing propensity to consume. And that is stated in 36. And then remember the title of the book. The title was The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. So the employment thing was the key thing here. And because Maynard Keynes and others started to push this towards the politicians, that also started to be influencing the whole society, and also what type of research and how companies were structured, also the legal system. You need to remember that most of the legal system has been built during the last 100, 150 years. And one guy that I would say most of you most likely have not heard about, but had a big influence on the automotive industry, but also the automotive industry had a big influence on the rest of society, is this guy, Victor Lebow. He had a big influence. So he summarized in this article you can find, in an article you can find from 55, his ideas that our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. The American dream. And this idea was then influencing the rest of society. And at the time it made sense, because they didn't see the environmental problems of the massive use of resources. They didn't see any of the challenges. So this is how society then was built up. And we also started to talk about quality. Quality, the idea that things in a product should broke down at the same time, all parts, so you didn't overdo something. And now, today, we consider quality as a positive term, right? We want to have products with quality. But then you should bear in mind that at the beginning, the idea with quality was actually the opposite, to make things break down at the same time. And you might have heard about the Prometheus cartel with lightning bulbs, I mean. And a lot of yeah. So the American dream here influenced society, and we now know that this is maybe not the best idea because it's causing us problems, but we've still been focusing on it. And companies started to utilize this type of different types of means called planned obsolescence. And I think you have seen and experienced several of them yourself. That products are designed with materials or components that degrade quickly, leading to replacement. For us as customers, it's sometimes quite hard to see and follow. We have marketing and design changes to make older models seem outdated, even if they still function well. We have removing useful features or limiting functionality to push the customer new models. We have devices require exclusive expensive accessories that become obsolete or incomplete over time, and etc., etc. There are a lot of these type of means. And at the time, they were rational, because that was a logic that helped the society to keep the production on a high level. And we have a new example here. Apple confirms it's slowing down your old iPhone. But now we know that this is not really useful. At the same time, companies have always wanted to provide value with as little resources as possible. But what they have been doing, focusing on, is mainly the production. And we know that this has led us to a non-suitable situation. And we as researchers, we should try to focus on what is the right thing to do, not just focusing on making things efficient. And Peter Drucker, he has given us a lot of, I would say, good quotes. He stated once, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. And I would say we are in the middle of huge turbulence. Not only related to environmental issues, we have also geopolitical, etc., etc. So we are in a big turbulence. And the thing here, to utilize the old solutions will not bring us to a better situation, at least not trying to make them more efficient. We need to take a step back, think about what is really, really something that could help us. How to find better logics. And I do see here we as researchers has a huge task to actually try to come up with those ideas. How to actually create better solutions. How to create a better society. Here we have been part of creating the situation, to creating the problems, directly or indirectly, but we also have the means to come up with ideas how to make something better, how to make a better solution, and more sustainable. And goes to the next slide here. And I think here the key core here is to not focus on the product and production only, but get a broader perspective. And that I will try to show in my coming slides here, because I think the reason why we ended up in this quite unnecessary situation was the fact that researchers, etc., society, focus on just the production without understanding something that is more important. And now I must apologize because the slides are in the wrong order. So I will take this slide first. You remember this figure? I showed you it earlier. I've been showing this for a lot of companies and organizations and CEOs, etc. And it's based on a lot of life cycle assessments that we put together back in 2006, 5-6. And what we try to illustrate is where in the average product's life cycle do the environmental impact occur. And for a lot of products, the biggest environmental impact, but also cost, is during the use phase. Quite minor is from the production and from the provision and end of life. But then we also wanted to illustrate when can we influence this environmental impact, and that is in the early phases of the design. The really, really early phases where we actually decide, for example, what type of, if you have a car, what type of fuel, etc., we will utilize. And when we have been showing this, a lot of companies, they have thought, okay, this is interesting. We have, and that is for most companies historically, they have been mainly focusing on the first 3 phases, trying to optimize, make them a little bit more efficient. But the interesting thing with this figure is that it also shows the use phase. And it's actually during the use phase you actually get the value of the product. It's there you actually get the benefit from something. What's before is just means for enabling this, and also partly what is after. When talking with companies, they're stating, but this is interesting. We are in control of the design, but if we, and that would be possible, it would be possible for us to design a product that is much more durable, to increase the life cycle, the lifetime of a product 2-3 times. No problem. But then we will have problem because then we will have saturated markets. Going back to this idea that we want to have the production up. But then, that is because I have the logic of selling the product. But then we used to question them, but what if you stop selling the product, provide a function instead? Then you will have instead of producing free, for example, you will produce one product. You will keep a longer relation with the customer and you will get paid over time. That is also a way to reduce your risk. And then they'll start to think, maybe that could be interesting for us. And we can see that more and more companies are considering this. Stop selling products, selling the function. You remember I talked about cars earlier. A lot of car manufacturers are now reconsidering stop selling cars, selling the function, especially when we start to have self-driving cars. Because instead of selling one unit to each, from a business perspective, in many cases, it's much more profitable to produce fewer, but ones that can serve more people. And so I see the trend, and it's also related to the fact that if you keep the ownership of your product, then you can also start to build up a base, a mature base for your future products. So going back to cars again, we have electrification of cars using batteries. More and more companies, they want to control the batteries because they want to have access to that resource for future batteries, future cars. And it's also a geopolitical situation that you want to control materials. You can't be sure that you constantly have an inflow of new resources. So it's not only from an environmental perspective. So this is a big change. And I will come to examples where companies have been doing this. Any questions so far? No? Moving back to this figure. Sorry for the order. When talking to companies and also looking to how companies have been working, they're quite used to spend quite a lot of time and money and resources on product development, because that is something they are used to. Quite often then they are developing the product and then they add on some service in the end. And that is a problem, because then if you have designed a product without considering the service from beginning, when you have the product, you're also limiting the potential to design the service, because the product has already made some limitations for what the service could look like. But that is something companies are quite used to. And then when it comes to business model development, very, very little money is spent on business model development. And if any money is spent, it's basically on just making the existing one a little bit more efficient. And the existing one is normally based on traditional sale. This is a challenge. And then when it comes to policies and so on, not that much money is spent. But here we can see a change also related to technologies and other things in society. Because new technologies, for example, AI, and that type of systems, IT systems, sensor systems, enable us to create business models that were not possible just a few years ago. Today it's much easier to follow a product during the use phase, to have monitoring the use, etc. We have also micropayments that were really tricky just a few years ago. So we can see that it needs to be more interactions, two-way interactions between not only how we design products and services, but also business models, because this enables new things. From a historical perspective, it has been one way, that the business model puts demands on how the product and services should look like. But now we can see two ways. But we can also see that products and service design historically have been just pushed by policies, but now new technologies enables new policies, but also enable new business models. So it's more like interaction, and should be seen like that. We can also see that when having this type of two ways, makes it much more easy to develop smarter solutions, smarter business models. And this picture, we have actually not really published any time, so that's why I don't have any reference. But it's related to freedom of action and economy of scale. And here we can see that a lot of companies, they have been focusing on this part, just production, and try to take as big market share as possible. And that is limiting them. But we can also see that now more and more companies, they are focusing on the strategy related to company B here, where they want to be involved closer to the customer and also during the use phase and end of life, getting more the life cycle perspective. And that makes it possible to actually increase the freedom of action. Because if you can control and be involved in more parts of the use phase, you will have more freedom than if you are just focused on the production. And that is something that a lot of companies have realized. And if you also are engaged in the use phase, then you also better understand what the customers really need, because you interact with them. You can see how they are using. And I do see that more research is needed in this type of area. That's why I bring it up here. So maybe I should have been more clear. The reason why I bring things up here is because I do see more research is needed. And this also brings me to the next, and that is in line with the approach from company B. We can see that more companies are nowadays interested in trying to find solutions that are more sustainable, and not only sustainable from an environmental perspective, but also business perspective, and having more holistic perspective. And that, I would say, is the reason why the concept of circular economy has actually been so successful, because this is from the new standard, ISO standard about circular economy. It's the definition of circular economy is an economic system that uses a systemic approach to maintain a circular flow of resources by recovering, retaining, or adding to the value while contributing to sustainable development. And I was actually involved in developing this standard and this definition. And I would say this definition has many similarities with how companies and organizations actually are working and focusing on. Because, of course, it's an economic system. I think that is, since we're talking about circular economy, but the key here is a systemic approach. What is important is to have an understanding of here and now around me, what is happening, but also over time. I'm coming back to that. What is happening over time? How can I act and create something that is useful? And it actually links back to this figure. I'm standing here. Who are my competitors? What is my surrounding? But also look forward. What will affect and how can I affect? And the idea is to have a circular flow of resources to secure that the sources we are using are not destroyed. We are keeping the resources on a high level. And then to keep the value. And I think this is important, because to have loops of resources without providing value it's pointless. I mean, in Sweden, we're world leading in producing mechanical calculators. We have the best company in the world. But it would be possible to continue to keep those mechanical calculators working. But since there are new technologies, that would be quite pointless. New technologies that provides us with more value. So what we need to secure is that what we have produce us with value or delivers value, but when it doesn't deliver value any longer, it should be possible to recover those resources and use it for other purposes. So it's important that we don't destroy the resources. And we also need to have things that contribute to sustainable development, because it's hard to do business on a dead planet. I stated that this is very in line with how companies have been working. And if I want to put it very simple, I would say circular economy focuses on creating as much value with as little resources and losses as possible over time. And that is something companies have always wanted to do. And we have always wanted to do as humans. The thing was that we, for too many years, were focusing too much on just production, not considering the use phase. So I see here more research is needed. And of course, the best way is to extend the use phase. What this tries to illustrate is the basic ideas about a society, a more circular society. And where we do see that use is in the focus. Of course, we will need resources getting into the system, but when we have it, we should secure that we use means like refurbishment, remanufacturing, repair, repurpose as much as possible, so we actually avoid losses. As I mentioned, to avoid losses over time. But what we do need to remember is the fact that we can't fight physics. Everything is constantly degrading. So we will need resources for enabling refurbishing, repair, etc. And that we need to acknowledge, because the systems that we use in order to circulate may or might not be circular themselves. And we will also have some waste, not really talking about waste, coming from those processes that we need to take care of and handle. But we need to secure that what is not considered to waste are that type of waste that either can be taken care of by the nature or is not at least harmful to the nature. But we should have more focus on value creation over time. And once again, a lot of companies have realized, okay, this is really, really good. We can earn more money. We can get closer collaborations with our customers. That is why, for example, the International Chamber of Commerce are interested in this. It makes sense from a business perspective. In the standard for circular economy, the ISO standard, we have also developed these types of principles for organizations. And if you quickly follow me, go back to the definition. Here you have the definition. Systemic approach, resources, value, sustainable development. Remember those? And then we go to the principles. When developing the principles, we actually were looking, okay, what are the core ones for a circular economy? Of course, the first one, systemic. We need to have a system thinking. We can't just look on smaller parts. We need to avoid sub-optimization. We need to have an overall perspective in order to be able to see, okay, what should we focus on? That implies that we need to have this focus on what is the right thing, what is effective, and then try to make it efficient. We also have to have a long-term perspective, not just a narrow perspective. Because it might be that if we develop something, we can't just focus on how a resource will be used in our use phase, because we also need to secure that that resource can be useful for future use phases. And that becomes very, very obvious if we, for example, are using a resource in our cars right now that we provide to our customers, and when we take back the cars, then we want the resource that we have used in the car to be useful for following phases. We also need to look into how we create value, not at least how we share value. Because it might be that we as a provider earns a lot of money from renting out cars or selling the function, but there are maybe actors out there that are losing. Actors that we might need to share some of our profit with, because otherwise they will be against our new business model or not make it possible for us to have it. For example, it can be that we need to build up take-back system that doesn't exist today. We need that take-back system, but then we can't just take all the money ourselves, because then we will have nothing. We also need to have a resource stewardship and resource traceability. So we need to secure that the resources we do have can be used for future generations. And I mentioned earlier that I'm working with up in Luleå, and there we are looking into metals and alloys, and also I have been looking into plastics. And here we have a problem, because historically we have been, for example, when it comes to alloys, only focusing on how can we optimize alloys so we can use them, for example, to make the production easier or fulfill some safety requirements, for example, when it comes to cars. But in the future, we need to have a longer perspective, because we do see that we need to take back those metals, those alloys, and if you're constantly just focusing on optimizing the alloys, mixing in a lot of different metals, we will make it very, very hard to reuse and recycle in the long term. The metals will be contaminated. So we need to think in new ways how we actually design materials. And that is a big thing. And also how we mix. For example, plastics is a very, very problematic material. Because a group of material, I would say, because we are mixing it with a lot of different type of additives, making it really, really tricky to separate and reuse. And in many cases, quite stupidly. Why do we need to color plastics that are used inside a product that no one anyway will see? Just the fact that you make a plastic colored, or at least make it, the worst is dark or black, makes it more or less hopeless to reuse, because the value is so little. Then we need to also trace resources in a smarter way. We need to see and understand where they are and in what condition and when they will come back, at what time. And that is something that has not been so much in focus until now. And we can see that in the European Union, they are now building the digital product passports ideas. And some companies with own, there are companies now selling function. I will come to one example in a few slides. They are already doing this because they need to know where their products are, in what conditions, etc., and what conditions the materials are. And I should mention maybe resource in this case, it's not only the material, it's also products. A product can be a resource. And then, of course, we need to secure that what we do produce is not harming the nature. Because if, most likely, it will be governmental actions that prevents this from happening. To do this, there are a lot of means. And here I have listed some strategies. This is from partly from paper Potting et al. About circular economy, measuring innovation in the product chain. And I think you can skip this. It's not that important. Focus on this. And there are normally called the R strategies. There are even more strategies. But the key here is that you should focus on combining. And I want to, and I would say those strategies are also useful if you're a researcher to think about your problem. Can you find a solution that actually implies that you can refuse it? or rethink, reduce. That is quite often the best. Find another way. Like with a good example I got in the question, instead of dealing with the waste, could I avoid the waste? But the thing here is also that just because you pick one, and I've seen so many papers or companies are picking one, okay, we are focusing on reduce, or we are focusing on repair. You should focus on the one that are relevant and combine them, because just because you're focusing on reuse doesn't state that you should come out, focus on repair and rethink. So to combine, try to find the best mix is the best. I do see those quite simple one strategies are useful in developing better solutions. Then we have another thing, and that is this about circular economy. I've been talking, Ken Webster is the father of actually the concept. He started to work with Ellen MacArthur Foundation 2012, I think it was, and he's a friend of mine. They already from the beginning saw a problem with the term circular, but they wanted to have an easy to understand term, a term that could attract companies. But a lot of people think about circular like the clock, getting back. But what circular economy is really about is sending things back to the future. In the future, we'll need to take care of it. But then we need right now to secure that it's doable. And that implies that we might need to consider actors and their needs that are not yet exist. So they are prepared to take care about the thing later on. And I think here, once again, a lot of research is needed. Okay, what could be, and then a circular economy example. This is an old example from Baines Lightfoot, and showing a photocopier, a case. And in the old days, you bought your photocopier yourself, and then you had to take care of all things. And of course, the copier provider provided some service. Today, I would say a predominant business model, at least for professional, is that the photocopier provider provides the whole thing. And that is in line with what actually provides value, because what the user wants is copies. They don't want to deal with all the hard work or the boring work related to service, monitoring, consumables, etc. And but from provider perspective, this is interesting because in the old way, what they wanted was a lot of service, etc. But now when they provide this solution of the function, they want the photocopiers to be more durable, not need a lot of spare parts, need a lot of energy and so on. And I will give you a better example. And this is in a company we have been working with a lot, and some of you that have heard me present before might remember this case. And this is a company nowadays called Toyota Material Handling. This is from the marketing material. Don't buy trucks. It makes sense to use a fleet of trucks to facilitate efficient material handling, but you don't have to own it to use it. And what they have been doing is they're really trying to stop selling forklift trucks. Unfortunately, some customers still force them to actually sell them because they want to own them. And when we started to work with this company, at least I started work back in 2003, normally the long-term rental contracts were 3 to 5 years. And what is a long-term rental contract? Historically, they went to the customer and tried to sell as many forklift trucks as possible. And then they left the customer. Now, with this new business model, they are visiting the customer. They are checking the customer's need, what is really needed, and then they provide the customer with a fleet of forklift trucks that they place at the customer site, but they are not handing over the ownership of the forklift trucks. The company still owns the forklift trucks, and the customer is just paying for the function. So when the customer don't need the forklift truck any longer, Toyota Material Handling Europe, they take the forklift trucks back, they place them into this type of refurbishing shops where they make them as new, so they can be sent out on short-term rental. And this has implied a lot of things. For example, now the customer, the long-term rental contract has increased in time. So I mentioned from 3 to 5 now to 5 to 12 years actually. But what is the gain from the customer perspective? If you are a factory owner, most likely forklift trucks is not your core business. So, and you don't have the network for how to find a new customer for a used forklift truck. You don't know how to serve it, etc. But that is the core business of Toyota. So it's much easier for them to manage the service and also find new customers. And that is a big thing. And they also know how to upgrade. So this is a study we did together to Mihiko Sakawa and I on the behalf of the CEO of that company. We looked into the real figures for the cost for rental for a customer or product sale. And we could see that even if they were standard forklift trucks, not modified to better fit, the cost from the customer's perspective was 87% compared to 100% if they were buying the product. And I'm not allowed to show the figures for Toyota, but I can tell you it's more profitable. And also it's profitable because they get closer collaboration, closer connection with the customer. And this type of studies and this type of research is also a need for more of this type of research. The key here is also that, and this goes to business risk, if you can provide more value with less resources, it also implies that you need to take less risk as a company. Because this, if you are a little bit into business, you realize, oh, this might also imply that our turnover is going down. But the turnover is not really relevant. It's profit on the last line. So it's actually good if you can decrease your turnover and increase your profit. That is good. So what are the trends driving in this direction? I would say a lot of companies that are focusing on circular economy and think this is useful, and once again, more research is needed, is increased profitability. It's more profitable. We have demographic change, we have increased competition, and lately, during last year, more geopolitical challenges. And I would say this is key. We have also new technologies enabling an increased focus on environmental issues. But more research about how can we do more circular business models, focusing on selling functions rather than products, is a mega trend, and a lot of companies want more research into this area. And I would say in order to actually make this impact, we need to focus on more on this. Sorry. So, soon at the end. But I mentioned earlier that it's important to focus on the right things, not just make things more efficient. Instead, we should focus on what really matters. And I will give you this as an example. Sorry. And it's also a good example because sometimes what we have learned is not actually true. And the thing is that we as humans, we like patterns, or actually our brain likes patterns. How many of you have glasses here or lenses in the room? quite a lot of you. And I think if you have that, you have experienced when you have needed to change your glasses that suddenly you see a lot of details that you have not seen before. You can see the leaves on the tree that you after a while don't see. Because that is a common thing, that the brain, if you don't need it or see any value of it, it stops seeing it. And we learn patterns. We see patterns. If you have a chessboard, we know how a chessboard pattern look like. And I don't have that figure now, but maybe I should have it. Have you seen this where you have a chessboard illusion that it's not really, the question is the same color? Oh, maybe I shouldn't have brought up this case. But we like patterns, so we get blind. And that is a challenge. But we also get blind because if we have learned something, we take that as a fact, even though things change. This is a company that started off as a cleaning company with two owners with, I would say, more or less no education. And then they bought equipment for cleaning with deionized water windows. And then one of the owners started to modify that equipment without understanding really what he was doing. But he tested and then he got better and better result. And one day he realized he could take away oil with just cold water. Just this cold water and this equipment that he has modified. And if we would have known something about chemistry, he should have known that you can't take away oil with cold water. How many of you have studied chemistry? None of you, okay. that is a lesson quite often or stated in textbooks. But it's also that you can't take away tar with cold water. But you can actually do that if you take away everything in the water. So it's just H2O. Because that is another thing. We're using sometimes terms because it's convenient in day-to-day life. This is your cold water. But what this really is, it's a mixture of gases, minerals, etc. and H2O. But if you take away all the gases, minerals, you get a very reactive material. It's quite interesting that water is, as far as we know, never seen in the universe alone. It's always mixed with something else. So it's very reactive. So sometimes you need to learn new things. When I approached this company first time, I was skeptical, but I thought, okay, let's check. And that is one thing you should remember. Always keep an open mind. What didn't work yesterday might work today. Don't check yourself and evaluate. Anyway, this company got a request from Orbit One. I'll drop the name they had before. Because they had problems when cleaning the PCB cards. Because they had either the chemical substances they used were destroying the components or it was not cleaned enough. So the owner, sorry, not the owner, the manager of the production plant asked Peter, one of the owner of the Clean Scandinavia company, could we try your water? So they started to use the water and got a good effect. Before they started this using this water, they had 4 to 5 persons monitoring all clean PCB cards to check if they were clean enough before putting on some sealing. We were involved in this project and we asked, would it be possible for us to make a life cycle assessment to see the benefit? And since Orbit One, Flextronics, now remember, they used to be Flextronics, but now the Orbit One, they stated, oh yes, we are happy, because we are happy with the result. So here is the result from the life cycle assessment. I have also a LCC, similar. And we could see that the conventional industrial cleaning were not as good as cleaning with clean water. Quite substantial difference. And now you have the handouts, so you know the next one. Because here, I would say, a lot of researchers would have stopped here and thought, this is good, and also business people. But if you do research, always try to take a step back and try to see things from a bigger picture. Because we asked then, could we also make get this bigger picture? So we did. So we also made a life cycle assessment where we also encountered the discarded PCB cards. And actually there we had the main environmental challenge, positive thing. Because we went from a lot of discarded PCB cards because of the cleaning process to more or less zero. And the PCB cards still discarded here is because they were not functioning from the beginning. The components were just not functioning. So this company actually could use the 4 or 5 persons for something else. They didn't need to check any PCB cards after this new technology were implemented with the clean water. But here we can see the big saving. The big saving was not the 4 or 5 persons. It was actually to avoid a lot of discarded PCB cards. And I do see this is a big example, or a good example, that you need to get the bigger picture. Because it could have also been the opposite, that here it looks fine, but you actually get a worse result here. Let's say that instead you had that one over here and that one over here, meaning that we had more PCB cards destroyed afterwards. Finally, before I start the Q&A, I just want to state that no single organization can be circular on its own, but together they can form a chain that becomes more circular. And I think that is important when doing research into this and focusing on how to make things provide more impact. Doing research, you can't just focusing on one part of the chain. You need to have involve more links. You need to have this system perspective. Understand systems of systems, because it's there you can actually create change. And it goes back also to the principles that I presented earlier.